All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we're going to talk about what Shawn Porter had to say to Errol Spence Jr.'s camp about Terence Crawford and Kenny Porter. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. We're in the welterweight division for this video, talking about Shawn Porter and what he had to say to Errol Spence Jr. and Derrick James about an assortment of issues, but specifically Terence Crawford and his father, Kenny Porter. Now, before I get into that, though, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are a longtime subscriber to the channel and a supporter of the channel, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for continuing to come by the channel. If you're new to the channel, please accept my invitation to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more videos. So let's get into this. Shawn Porter was on his podcast, the Porterweight Podcast, and he did what I thought was a very heartfelt reaction to some things that were out there about him and his father, and also about the fight with Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. So first things first, let's get to the part that is probably most personal to him, and that was when Derrick James had made mention of an issue between Shawn Porter and his father, Kenny Porter. Now, the issue came up in an interview where people were throwing questions at Derrick James and talking about Terence Crawford and how Terence Crawford had I don't know how many, 9 straight knockouts or whatever. He definitely hasn't had 9 straight knockouts, but a series of knockouts, and how that would affect the Errol Spence Jr. fight. Derrick James said knockouts against who? And then he mentioned Shawn Porter. Now, one of the reasons that people talk about Terence Crawford knocking out Shawn Porter is that Shawn Porter is the same as a competitor, or excuse me, is a common opponent of Errol Spence Jr. So in the fight with Errol Spence Jr., Shawn Porter went the distance. In the fight with Terence Crawford, Shawn Porter had lost the fight by way of TKO. Now, what Derrick James said was, look, Shawn Porter's father, Kenny Porter, said that he was going to stop the fight before the fight even started. And he said what you saw there was a power struggle going on between Kenny Porter and Shawn Porter, and Kenny Porter was going to show, or did show, Shawn Porter who the boss is by throwing in the towel. And he said, and then Derrick James went on to say that Shawn Porter had not spoken with his father since then. Shawn Porter, and I'm going to get to the Terence Crawford portion of it in the fight. In the fight, because that's obviously the most relevant part, of the most, comfortable thing to talk about. Shawn Porter said, disagreed with that, or rejected that, or debunked that, or whatever phrase you want to use, kind of. Because he said, look, I've been talking to my father. He said, I was went to the movies with my father last week. My father hasn't been around in Texas to talk to Derrick James. So pretty much, how would Derrick James know whether or not I was talking to my father? He said Derrick James may be relying upon what other people had to tell him. So you probably shouldn't do that unless you get it straight from the horse's mouth. You wouldn't know whether or not I have a good relationship with my father. Now, Shawn Porter, in the same breath, though, did say that he had not talked to his father about that fight. He said that even though, he did retire, and his father did not know that he was going to retire that day, that his father and he both knew where his mind was about retiring before too long. So he basically said that's not true about me not speaking to my father. However, in my opinion, well, first of all, I don't know who Derrick James got that from. I know for certain that I had heard out of Shawn Porter's mouth not too long after the fight that he went down and he had breakfast with his father. I don't know if it was that weekend or the weekend after the fight, but that he had done that. So I knew that they were speaking. I doubted very much it. When I heard Derek James say that, I was like, I don't know if that's true that he hadn't spoken with them at all, because I knew of Shawn Porter having made mention of the fact that he was either going to breakfast with his father or he had conversations with his father. But what he said was that I have not talked to my father about that boxing match. So maybe that's what Derek James was referring to, that he hadn't spoke to him about the match, or they had never had, another conversation about boxing before. But whatever that case is, that's how Shawn Porter, addressed it. And you got to respect that. That's right out of his mouth, talking about the relationship between him and his father. Now, the more important thing, and the thing that's really relevant to what's going on in boxing, is that Shawn Porter also said, look, man, do not expect, referring to what Derek James said, like, don't expect, he said, I don't know what you expect with Terence Crawford, but, I would not go out there thinking that you're going to get in there against a guy, like Terence Crawford, and it's not going to be a very, very serious fight. Like, do not believe that fight between him and Errol Spence Jr. is going to be like some pushover fight. He said, look, he's going to be as difficult to fight as I was for Errol. Terence Crawford's going to be just that difficult. He said he's fast. He said, don't think he's not as fast, or he's not as strong, that he's not as technical a fighter. Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford is like that. And, pretty much do not go in there underestimating Terence Crawford. And, I think that's fair. I like to have fun with the subject, to be honest with you, because I got a lot of people that are on the channel that come to the channel in the live streams, in the comment section. And, most people are really like both fighters. Most of the fan base, I think, have an appreciation for both fighters. But, when you get into it and that particular fight is going to happen, people start to really pick sides and get real severe on one side or another. I personally take Errol Spence Jr. to win that fight because of the style. But, and also Shawn Porter was also said, look, man, if you compare the power between the two, he said Errol Spence Jr. hits with more of a thudding punch, and Terence Crawford hits with more of like a sharp, like a whip type of punch. But when Errol Spence Jr. hits you, you're feeling it. You're feeling that thudding punch, on you. So he's like, now when I interpret thudding punch versus like kind of a whipping punch, that seems to me like, Terence Crawford is catching you at the end of his punch, catching you with a lot of momentum. Errol Spence Jr. is hitting you with shots up close, and he's getting his weight, getting more of his weight and more of his stuff, body weight into the punch, where Terence Crawford is catching you at the end of the punches, which would make it more like at the very end, all that centrifugal force is lighting off at the end of the punch. But he's basically saying, look, man, this dude, basically saying, hey, man, do not underestimate Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford is like that. That is not necessarily, just because you beat your Danis Ugas like that does not mean that you're going to beat Terence Crawford like that. But anyway, all the way it goes, man, I got to respect what Shawn Porter said in the particular interview about the stuff with him and his father. I still will tell you in a minute, that's also between you and your father. That was a bad stoppage. That was a fight, and I think Shawn Porter also would agree that was a stoppage. That was a premature stoppage, and that really was the frustration that Derek James had, and that Errol Spence Jr. you could clearly see had in that fight, because it was like, man, this guy's gonna, if you're gonna knock the man out, if we're gonna have a mutual opponent, and you're gonna knock the dude out, don't let it be because your father threw the towel in. And stop the fight when the guy wasn't even hurt. You know what I mean? Because if that was the case, Kenny Porter could have thrown the towel in on for the Errol Spence Jr. fight after Errol Spence Jr. knocked him down. But anyway, that's my take on the situation. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.